Samantha Wolf, and I will be talking about the rhetoric of fake news. I feel that it is important to understand how fake news claims its victims. Knowing the warning signs makes fake news easier to pick out from legitimate sources. Defined by the Cambridge Dictionary is false stories that appear to be news, spread on the internet or using other media, usually created to influence political views or as a joke. In researching this project, I would like to add a few more prerequisites to this definition that help describe the fake news phenomenon we are seeing today. Fake news is deliberate. There is a purpose behind the falsehoods and twisting the facts. Fake news is malicious. This sets it apart from satire, which is self-aware fake news. I will discuss satire a little bit at the end of the presentation. Scholar Nicole Cook defines post-truth best. She states that it is an era in which audiences are more likely to believe information that appeals to emotions or existing personal beliefs, as opposed to seeking and readily accepting information regarded as factual or objective. However, this idea that we are in a post-truth era is incorrect. For there to be a post-era, there also needs to have been a truth era. There has always been fake news and other manipulative media. The problem is that there has never been such a widespread platform on which to spread such media. In order to understand how fake news gains traction on the internet, one must first understand the rhetoric behind journalism. The prevailing force behind journalism, or really any type of media, is that of social constructivism. To put it simply, social constructivism means that the reality cannot be discovered. It does not exist prior to its social intervention. This is basically the tree falls in the forest scenario. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to witness it, did it happen? Does it matter? Journalism influences this perception of reality. Short of being at a major event, it is through journalism that the world perceives the wider reality beyond that which they are personally experiencing. Journalism is an attempt to record reality and, by its very nature, will be a number of steps removed from its goal. Journalism is not infallible, far from it. News stories are written by a handful of people from the facts available at the time. They are the only ones interpreting the facts for the readers or viewers, putting information into manageable chunks for easier digestion. This is where fake news begins to take hold. Unless individuals are familiar with information literacy and skepticism, they will have to take the news report as truth. This is especially dangerous when combined with the ideas behind post-truth. If people don't want to believe what's being relayed, they will turn to a source that is saying something closer to what they want to believe. Just a quick refresher, the definition for metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action which is not literally applicable. Metaphor is a common mechanic in all forms of writing, excepting perhaps technical manuals. However, in the wrong hands, metaphor can do a lot of damage. The very nature of metaphor is to draw connections and comparisons from one thing to another. This is a hazard in news reporting, especially when considering how journalism shapes reality. Fake news uses this to their advantage. Metaphor is best used in a figurative sense. It is not meant to be a concrete analogy. Most of the sources I found drew parallels between metaphor and distress. Fake news sources want to evoke emotion in its consumers. This emotional response can range from anger to sadness, but in any case, the emotions are distressing. An article by Anna Verbitska states that describing distress figuratively, such as with metaphors, exposes deep-seated beliefs about distress at the societal level. It's basically a hive mind idea. Societies respond differently than individuals. The emotions started by metaphor create a volatile environment. Traditional rhetoric and arguments can be difficult to employ. It's like trying to reason with an upset child. It's much easier when they aren't angry. I see this emotion the most when looking at this use of emotion the most when looking at headlines. A catchy headline will evoke emotion in the consumer, who may not bother to read beyond the subtitle. The metaphor says it all. They are able to draw conclusions based on what is being compared. Fake news uses this to its advantage, too. In today's busy world, people might not have time to read a full article or watch a newscast. The headline may be all they hear about something until they have the time or the will to do further research. The main thing to remember is that no one is exempt from metaphor use. Trusted sources, fake sources, conservative, liberal, conspiracy theorists, everyone uses metaphor. But being aware of the response and impact metaphor evokes is important for understanding how fake news sources use it to their advantage. The link between language and emotion is interesting, but only when seen in action does it begin to make sense in the context of journalism. I happened to find an excellent case study called Representations of Ebola and Its Victims in Liberal American Newspapers. While this is not fake news, it shows the role that metaphor plays in journalism. To paraphrase the article, the prevailing metaphor behind the Ebola outbreak is that of a war or conflict. Phrases such as the war against Ebola have been thrown around. The focus on Ebola as a conflict humanizes the virus but dehumanizes the victims. As the article puts it, African victims tend to be impersonalized and portrayed as voiceless and agentless, rarely occupying the role of a fighter in the military, metaphoric representation of the disease, which runs counter to the findings of recent studies detecting a change toward a more positive image of Africa in the media. Historically, epidemics focus on the plight of the victims. Taking the focus away takes away the reader's empathy towards them and instead twists it into a strange, selfish type of fear for themselves. The military metaphor is helpful for cultivating an attitude about competitive winning against the personified disease, but does nothing to help create a connection to the victims. Just a disclaimer, the GIF is fake. It's from the Onion movie. Yes, they have a movie. Fake news also describes news that is deliberately fabricated for the purposes of satire. How is this different from the fake news we've been talking about? Paul Achter wrote an article on news satire in 9/11. The things he set down in his article can be used as a guide for satire today, especially when the question of crossing an ethical line is raised. Achter noticed that after 9/11, there was a collective analysis on the role comedy plays in society. He then focuses on the response the Onion had. Just as a side note, the Onion is my favorite satire news source, and this article only confirmed it for me. In a response to 9/11, the Onion shifted to promote critical thinking and reader engagement, specifically when considering Middle Eastern politics. According to Achter, the Onion invited citizen participation, which is another way of saying it got people to talk about their thoughts on the events that were happening, rather than just accepting what news sources were telling them. I have studied parody before, namely in a paper about women using parody to reclaim a negative stereotype in 18th century British literature. I feel that similar rules applied to this case. Through the use of parody, the Onion was able to promote information literacy in a skeptical worldview that ultimately helped its readers to cope with the floods of information that were being forced upon them. I think that there should be more of a distinction between malicious fake news and parodic fake news. One is a detriment to the society, and it is definitely not the Onion. That about wraps up my portion of the presentation. We'll take it now to Lydia.